Jay-Z and Beyoncé, who built the better empire? So I've been a Jay-Z fan for a very long time, and I was wondering who made more money between this extremely powerful couple in music. So I went ahead and looked it up. So supposedly between the two of them, they're worth about $3.5 billion, which is a lot of money, but they each individually built their fortunes completely differently. One of them built their fortune through music and owning every piece of it, and the other built their $2.5 billion fortune where music barely counts for any of it. So let's jump into it. The first question is, how much are each of them worth individually? Jay-Z and Beyoncé. So I pulled up the public records. So a lot of their wealth is tied up into private companies. So there's no way to know exactly what it is, but a lot of analysts put Beyoncé's net worth at $1 billion. In fact, that was confirmed with Forbes, confirming that she is a billionaire. Now, if we jump over to Jay-Z, he supposedly is worth $2.5 billion. So this puts that power couple at about $3.5 billion, which supposedly is worth more than Oprah Winfrey and Taylor Swift put together. So let's go ahead and start with Beyoncé. How did she make $1 billion? So her path to $1 billion is definitely one of the most impressive financial stories in music history, because she built a vertically integrated empire where she controls every revenue stream from the studio all the way to the shelf. She doesn't license her name. That's because of Parkwood Entertainment, the company she founded in 2010. She owns rather than just the licenses. Now, if we look at one of her tours, the most recent Renaissance tour in 2023, many estimates put her revenue from that show between $580 and $600 million. She also had her Cowboy Carter tour in 2024 and 2025, which supposedly generated over $400 million as well. And supposedly her earnings peaked at about $148 million in 2025 alone. Also in 2024, Beyoncé was really busy when she launched her hair care brand, Sacred. She also launched a premium whiskey called Sir Davis, and that was in partnership with Moet Hennessy. Supposedly she was paid $6 million in Uber stock all the way back 2015, and that stock eventually became worth about $70 million. So that's a pretty good investment. So as you can see, Beyoncé, every deal that she makes, she figures out a way to turn it into a long-term investment. Now, what about Jay-Z? How did he build up $2.5 billion as a net worth? So this part was kind of shocking when I looked it up. Most of the time, people think that his net worth is built off of music royalties, but supposedly that only accounts for 4% of that $2.5 billion for Jay-Z. If you think about that, the man who labels himself as one of the greatest rappers to ever live built most of his billions of dollars through business, not through music. So Jay-Z's net worth, the majority of it comes from brand equity in various alcohol beverages. He was a part owner in the company Ducey, and supposedly when he exited that company, he netted about $750 million just from that one deal. He also owned a portion of Armand de Brignac, which had a partial sale to the Louis Vuitton company. He supposedly netted $315 million in cash, and he still kept half of his stake in that company. And if you remember, he was a part owner in the company Tidal, which was a music streaming competitor. He bought for $56 million and ended up flipping it for $300 million supposedly. He was also an investor in Uber, so supposedly he invested $2 million, and at one point that was worth $70 million. He also had his clothing brand Rockaware, and supposedly he sold that brand for $204 million. So these are massive transactions. And if we think back many years, even decades, he was a founding person in Rock Nation. That record label manages artists like Rihanna and produced the Super Bowl halftime show. So as you can see, that Jay-Z did make money from rap, but he also used it as a platform to catapult his wealth. So both of these people are really smart, really rich, but who's the smarter business person, Beyoncé or Jay-Z? I'd say this is a pretty close call. Both of them deserve serious credit, but they both show their business intelligence in two completely different ways. I would say that with Beyoncé, her genius is in ownership and control. Her business model operates on three distinct tiers. The performance tier generates cash flow. The ownership tier generates compounding assets. The brand equity tier provides leverage, so that way when she's negotiating with other artists, it gives them institutional positioning. So as you can see, she turned touring into a production company demonstration. She turned every album into an asset class. She built Parkwood so that way her team keeps all of the margins that generally would go out to other companies. So if we jump over to Jay-Z, you can see that his genius is spotting undervalued assets. In fact, a lot of time he even times his exits perfectly. Every major wealth event in Jay-Z's career involves selling one of his assets. None of those massive financial events have anything to do with a concert or some sort of a streaming service to one of his songs. For example, his purchase for Tidal, buying it for $56 million and then selling it for $300 million. So you can see both of them are exceptional financially, but the difference is Beyoncé builds and holds on to her assets, and you look at Jay-Z, he builds up the asset and then exits perfectly. So two completely different strategies. Both are extremely effective for this couple. So which one of these two rich people started with more advantages in their childhood? I would say that both of them came from relatively modest upbringings, and that makes it even more remarkable considering what they both built. So if we look at Beyoncé, she grew up in a middle-class family in Houston, Texas. Her father, Matthew Knowles, left a corporate job to go ahead and manage Destiny's Child, and then after the band broke up, he was managing Beyoncé for her solo career. In fact, supposedly their family made a lot of financial sacrifices to support Beyoncé's career in the early days. So as you can see, she had a lot of talent, a dedicated family, but just not a lot of money from inherited wealth or industry connections. Now, if we look at Jay-Z, he supposedly grew up in the Marcy projects in Brooklyn, New York. And if you know New York, that is definitely one of the more tough housing projects in New York during that time. He co-founded Rockefeller Records in 1995 as well. And that was basically from scratch with limited resources and no major label support. And supposedly he built up that business because mainstream traditional music industry just wasn't open to that genre of music during that time. So as you can see, they're both coming from basically regular backgrounds, and they both built up billion-dollar empires from persistence and intelligence. And considering that, it gives it some context that their $3.5 billion net worth is really extraordinary. So both of these people are musicians, obviously. So who made more money from their music catalog, Jay-Z or Beyoncé? So this is pretty interesting because both of them have taken completely different routes in regards to their music ownership. So if we look at Beyoncé, she controls her entire catalog through Parkwood Entertainment. And if we look at her music catalog, it's estimated by a lot of analysts to be worth about $300 million. Even to this day, she has consistently refused to sell it, even though a lot of her peers have sold their masters to investment funds. So that decision alone keeps future earnings in her pocket indefinitely. Now, if we look at Jay-Z, he also owns a significant portion of his catalog. He's been really careful about licensing his music as well. Now, he's had about 13 different albums, and those albums have sold about 33 million copies in the US alone. But as we talked about earlier, his music industry wealth is pretty small in comparison to his net worth, coming in at about 4% of that due to music royalties. So both of these artists understood at an early time that owning your catalog is much more important than a front-loaded payment from various corporations. I would say that that philosophy is probably not a coincidence. They probably influence each other on that decision over their 20-year relationship. So who has a more sustainable long-term business, Jay-Z or Beyoncé? I would say both of them are definitely built to last, just in different ways. So Beyoncé's empire is tied closely to her persona and her artistic output. So as long as she keeps performing and creating, her income is just going to compound, especially since she has kept rights to her music. The only downfall is it does require her active involvement at some level. So if she were to completely retire, it could slow her financial growth. So if we look at Jay-Z, his financial wealth is detached more so from his personality and his artistic ability, his alcohol investments, his real estate investments, Rock Nation, his venture capital bets. All of those generate revenue whether or not Jay-Z makes another album or not. So his wealth is likely to increase whether or not he makes music or personal appearances. So if we're looking at long-term stability, Jay-Z has a model that's slightly more passive than Beyoncé. But if we look at Beyoncé, she's slightly moving in that direction as well, building structures that are going to generate wealth whether or not she's present. So what financial lessons can we learn from Beyoncé and Jay-Z? I like this question. So if we look at Beyoncé, basically own everything you can. Do not license when you can actually own it. Don't outsource when you can actually just do it in-house, because every deal that she's done, she asks herself, how can I turn this into equity, into something bigger instead of just cash up front? And that principle works at basically any income level. Now, if we look at Jay-Z, I would say you should use your platform to get into rooms that you generally wouldn't be able to get into and investment opportunities that are presented because of your platform. So through his music, he ended up having a lot of cultural influence, and he converted that into durable wealth by moving fast into various different opportunities, such as Uber when it was still private, and Tidal when streaming was relatively new, and luxury alcohol brands before it became crowded. So between the both of them, Jay-Z and Beyoncé, this is probably one of the cleanest examples of turning fame into lasting financial independence rather than just income. In fact, when you look at a lot of entertainers, a lot of them make a huge amount of money and they end up with relatively little amount to show for it once the dust settles. But if you look at the Carters, this is definitely an exception. So you might be asking yourself, is there anything that Beyoncé beats Jay-Z financially? I would say yes. Beyoncé made her billions of dollars being an artist and performing, and that's pretty rare for artists, because when you compare that to Jay-Z, his billionaire status came largely from financial transactions, not his art. So this was confirmed by Forbes in 2025, and they attributed her billionaire status to over 3 decades of music, 2 record-breaking world tours, and a growing portfolio of consumer brands. That's not to mention her real estate empire. And she's only one of 5 musicians that have reached billionaire status. artist and probably the only one that's reached that status primarily through music and touring. So when you consider that, it's really impressive, especially since aside from her business success, Beyoncé is one of the most culturally impactful artists of her generation. And if you look at Jay-Z, he mostly stepped back from the music industry to focus on business. So who would you say built a better financial empire, Jay-Z or Beyoncé? Well, based on everything that I was able to find, Jay-Z wins by net worth. Like I said, a lot of analysts put him at $25 billion in comparison to Beyoncé at $1 billion. And if you look at his financial architecture, it's arguably much more sophisticated than Beyoncé. I mean, the music made him rich and famous, but ownership made him a billionaire. So which path is more impressive really depends on your values. If you value financial engineering, Jay-Z wins. If you value becoming a billionaire while being the absolute top of your art, Beyoncé definitely wins. So for me personally, I'm going to choose Jay-Z just because I've been a fan of his for many decades. But what about you? Leave a comment below, let the rest of us know, and I'll see you on the next video.